Good morning.
Good
It's
morning.
May the 8th, and welcome to Focus on the News. We have Elena Oki with us. We're delighted to have you with us, Elena. And today, our topic is going to be, will New York City prosecute subway riders who defend themselves? And as you know, we've got this situation where we had this fellow Jordan Neely who at the very last minute squeezed himself through the door of a subway, jumped in, and just immediately went into a very violent rant against the people there. And there was a good Samaritan, a Marine, who managed to wrestle this guy to the ground with the help of a couple of other members of the passengers on the subway. And then this fellow Neely, who was the one who jumped on board, he died of asphyxiation, compression of the neck, according to the chief medical examiner. And so that was the situation. So now you have this is sort of the classic situation where you have normal citizens on one side, and then you have the sort of this race baiting industry that goes wild. You have the trial lawyers who want big judgments, and so now you have all of this controversy. Well, should you look at the person who jumped on and threatened everybody on the subway as the guilty party, or should you look at the subway riders who defended themselves as the guilty parties? So I know you've taken a look at it a little bit. Do you have an initial thought of what you think about the situation?
I think, Senator, with your experience working for criminal law division of Pentagon, being the chief of several offices, you probably are the best party to comment on this. But I certainly have researched the case, and it appears there are several issues that definitely are worthy of note in this tragedy, because it is a tragic event. Someone have died, a person lost their life. I did research the background of Mr. Jordan Neely. According to New York Post, his aunt have stated that he was a deeply traumatized individual when his mother was allegedly murdered by the living boyfriend, as his own father apparently left the family. Don't quote me on that. Check New York Post. There is CNN also wrote about the history of Mr. Jordan Neely, sadly deceased. And his aunt said that he has not received adequate mental health help when he was a teenager, when his mother was found allegedly dead in what appeared to be a suitcase in 2007. And he, as a young teenager, was called to testify what it sounds like against the boyfriend in the trial, in that murder trial. And according to his aunt, in that article that I've read, allegedly he was very traumatized. He apparently said several times that he has either PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Apparently, according to, again, alleged in some of these articles, he said he had the schizophrenia. I don't know. I'm not able to diagnose anybody. I'm not a medical doctor. However, according to some of these articles, he referred to himself as somebody in need of mental help, and his aunt referred to him as somebody whose system failed, because he said there was always an issue with insurance. So we look at this individual who has been apparently without a home despite of having relatives in the city. His uncle also in one of the articles said that he was concerned that Mr. Jordan Neely is apparently using certain substances. Again, don't quote me. It's allegedly. Check your own articles on CNN, the New York Post. And it appears that this deeply troubled individual, who relatives say was unhoused, what they call nowadays. Nowadays people don't like to use the word homeless as if it changes anything. If we say unhoused, that's a tragedy that we in America, the country that sends billions overseas, are still dealing with our own people being homeless, sleeping on the streets, suffering from the lack of adequate mental health care, while we're sending billions overseas to countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, including Ukraine, in these foreign wars that we are supporting across the world, while our own people have this history of lack of housing, of lack of mental health. So if we look at his life, he had about 42 calls, what apparently the newspapers say assisted aid, as if he was mentioned as a party who is distressing other people out there in the public. That's my understanding. Then he also had allegedly assaulted a woman, a 67-year-old lady who suffered a broken nose and some other issues. There was another apparently alleged assault. Again, check all the newspaper articles who is listening. That's just what I was able to find. And then this deeply troubled individual goes into the subway and allegedly starts threatening or threatening things to the commuters who believe that apparently there is an imminent danger to their life or to the lives of the ones who are on a commute. If nobody's ever been in a situation on the train, I have. You're in confined space. There isn't any much where you can run. So what we can see is a situation is where the person who was neglected by the system, his own aunt says, was basically an epitome of system failure, who allegedly was apprehended for the assaults. In one of the articles, it was mentioned that he threatened to allegedly kill his own grandfather. Again, if the newspapers are mistaken, I'm just reporting on what I see. You can Google it up. This is all allegedly. We don't know all the details. But apparently, the person like that who has a particular history of apparent assaults for which he was held at Rikers and then recently released, and then there was still a warrant for his arrest. I mean, this is a very serious issue. And then the commuters feel that they're threatened, and then they are trying to take matters in their own hands. So who do we want as a society to place the blame on? Under New York state, I believe, penal code, again, don't quote me, Article 35, Google it, I did. It appears that in New York, the individuals do have the right to self-defense. It's nuanced. There has to be, on their side, they have to believe that there is a threat of the assault, impending assault. It's not black and white as far as the, it has to be a proportionate force and all that. But the individuals on a commuter train, from what I noticed on that video, are not trying to stop the person who is trying to apprehend the alleged, threats that came from Mr. Neely. So what I am seeing that commuters obviously also have in agreement that there was a certain threat, because if there wasn't, they would attack the Marine, and they're not attacking the Marine. So what appears to me is that the people who are on a commuter train have felt that they have been in the middle of impending assault of sorts, There was immediate threat to life. And at this point, the investigation is impending, so they're going to be determining whether the threat was proportionate to what happened, or whether it was a reality of things. But the city of New York have had knowledge of this individual, have been unhoused, have been having a history of mental problems, having have a history of alleged assaults. And this individual apparently screamed that he was hungry and he wanted some food, and then he allegedly didn't care whether he has to go to jail or whether he has to die. In other words, I wasn't there, but allegedly in the newspapers, there's all kinds of information that people who were on the commuter train believed that they're in danger, that in their lives of the commuters are in danger. So who is to blame? Well, we know that the investigation will look into it. It will look at all sides. But at this point, it appears that the system has failed the commuters. Because if you place dangerous individuals who repeatedly are on record, whether alleged assaults, whether threats, whether they're a danger to the public, whether they have calls, and you continue to allow these individuals to go without, possibly he needed mental health help, alleged by his aunt, I don't know. But somebody, some professional who is qualified to make that determination should have looked into his case, should have determined what's the best course of action. So neither he nor public are in danger. And unfortunately, the system and the entire city, with the what are the proper agencies who were aware of Mr. Neely's difficulties, of his struggles, of his apparent record, has failed to protect the public. And unfortunately, this is what we have when we, as a system, as a society, fail to protect the public. The public is going to take matters in their own hands in order to protect what they perceive as a threat to their life. Whether it's right or wrong, we cannot blame somebody for feeling threatened or for feeling that there is an assault impending on the commuter train and trying to prevent it. We should have not had that situation happen in the first place. And we shouldn't have Mr. Neely been in this position where his well-being is obviously compromised and the public well-being is compromised. Now we have death, and now everybody is pointing fingers at the commuter. Everybody's pulling a race card, black and white card. That's not that. It's one American who was failed by the system, failed by the people in the proper authority and professionals who should have taken care of what he was representing to the community, whether it was danger, whether he needed help, but it wasn't addressed. But that mushroomed into unnecessary confrontation where now public felt threatened. And unfortunately, the result we know resulted in death, but it's one American trying to protect what they believe is themselves from another American.
It's definitely, excuse me, it's definitely a good thing that we do have some good Samaritans like this, because as you mentioned early, you get on a subway, you're on the subway car, you're whizzing along, you can't just get off, you can't leave, so you're stuck. And
Yep.
all of these people were in that situation where this fellow, Neely, just squeezed his way in at the very last minute, and immediately he didn't sort of rummage around or anything. He came there to threaten people, and he did so without any delay. He just started the moment that he got on the subway. And one of the articles used the terminology. They said, many passengers became visibly uncomfortable and moved to other parts of the train car. Now, visibly uncomfortable is media speak for they were about to wet their pants. They were scared to death of this guy. They fled to the far end of this car and they couldn't go any further. So they always try to sort of make it sort of minimize what the effect of the criminal and what he's doing. But he goes on, he immediately he starts saying, I'm fed up, I'm hungry, I don't have nothing. I don't care if I die, I don't care if I go to jail. He then hurls his coat down to the floor, which is, it's kind of a symbol of I'm ready to fight, I'm going to do violence. I think that's kind of a universal symbol when somebody throws down. And so he does that. And then he starts saying, he says, beyond going to jail, he says, I'm ready to go to jail and I don't care if I get a life sentence. Now, when he says, I don't care if I get a life sentence, I think many people would gather from that he is about to do something. He's about to commit murder and he doesn't care whether he goes to jail for life. So he's effectively threatened everybody on that car with murder, with physical violence. Now, this is a guy who has, now there are 4, they keep coming up with more. Now it's up to 4 unprovoked attacks against women where he just goes up and he bashes them in the face. And this one woman was described as having severe facial injuries that included a broken nose, and you don't know what else it was, but she was very badly injured by this fellow. He has a history of violence that goes back many years. He's criminally insane. In one instance, he was pounding on the driver's door, threatening to kill the driver. Now, not in this particular incident, but in one of the many other incidents. So you have this situation on the New York subway system where you have this dystopian underground horror show where you have all of these criminal lunatics roaming around, threatening, robbing, beating people. I ran across an article the other day that just stunned me. This was out of the Daily Mail from England. They tend to be a little more open when they discuss American crime issues. They don't put all of the little fuzzy touches on it. They were very blunt. They said New York City had 25 people last year shoved onto the railroad tracks. These weren't people having some sort of altercation. This was just all of these lunatics down there just coming up behind people, men, women, old, young, and they just throw them onto the tracks, knowing that it's very likely that they will be killed as soon as they fall. There was one man last year who was killed after somebody had been thrown down onto the tracks and he jumped down there to try to help him, and then the train hit him and he was killed himself. So here was another case of a good Samaritan who gave his life trying to save the life of another. These are people that we should be giving these people the Presidential Medal of Freedom instead of putting them before a grand jury and saying, well, let's see, what does the mob want? What is, this reminds me of all of the, the rabbis who are yelling, crucify him, when Pontius Pilate was trying to deflect their attention, saying, "Well, why don't you take Barabbas instead and put him on the cross? No, crucify him." It's the same just evil mob mentality that comes from these New York politicians. And I would, among them, there's such a group, but the governor of New York, Hochul, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Earlier she was saying, "Oh yes, we do have too much crime in the subways." Now she's saying, "Get him, let's go ahead and let's persecute him." So she's just catering to the mob. She says, "Okay, the mob wants this. The trial lawyers want it because there's big bucks anytime that you can do one of these things." And meanwhile, you have this fellow. He was evidently Daniel Penny. Daniel Penny he spent a 4-year stint in the United States Marine Corps. He made it to sergeant during that time, which reflects well on him. That's a good accomplishment in a 4-year term. He has an absolutely pristine, clean record. He has no criminal record of any sort, and he had the courage to intervene because he was maybe a little bit stronger than some people, maybe a little better trained to deal with the violent people, and he took action to protect women, children, elderly people on that train. And so now, I mean, this is classic dystopian America today, where immediately you have a hero who steps forward in the defense of the innocent, and the whole system just descends on him and says, "Get him, persecute him, crucify him." So it is interesting, but 25 people in the last year were pushed on the railroad track. I could not believe that figure. It was just astounding. But the part of it deals with this fact that we no longer treat the criminally insane as the danger that they genuinely are to society. It was back in 1965 that this deinstitutionalization movement took place. Now, I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure this is correct. There was a very interesting movie. I think it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes, I believe so.
Is that the one that where they had the portrayal of the people who were this really good-hearted bunch of people who were in a lunatic asylum, and they do a breakout? Is that the one? Do I have?
It appears to be the case. I have not watched it. I may have watched the snippets of it, but it appears to be this movie was, according to Wikipedia page, portraying the one would say maybe some borderline inhumane treatment of the patients in the facilities, which I think again this deinstitutionalization movement was kind of in part, depicted why they were trying to do that in that movie, according to some of these Google researches that I have done. Yeah.
Well, mankind is always subject to this nirvana fallacy, and the nirvana fallacy is comparing something which is flawed to something which is perfect and unimaginably idealistic. And so I think we had that occur with that movie. Whether I have the right title or not, I don't know if it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But anyway, it's the story of these very nice, crazy people who are in an asylum, and the people running the asylum are meanies, and these fun-loving, humorous, crazy people go out and they're enjoying life outside of the walls of the asylum, and the meanies are chasing them and all this. And it was a fun movie, and for people who have no contact with the criminally insane, they didn't portray criminally insane. It was just, these were just crazy people. They never hurt anybody. But the institutions across America were designed to restrain dangerous, violent people, rapists, murderers, muggers, and so we got swept up in this movement to deinstitutionalize, release, close all of these terrible places. And so you had people who often just couldn't take care of themselves. So when you see the pictures of all the people living in the little tents and the cardboard boxes, think deinstitutionalization. These are people, yes, being in a mental institution is not ideal, but it's a whole lot better than being hungry, living in a cardboard box in the middle of the winter when it's, below zero and people are freezing to death. So we went through that, and unfortunately, it was not just the insane who were on the receiving end. It wasn't good for them, but it was hideous for American society. And, we know that back in the days when I was growing up, a lot of people didn't even bother to lock their front door when they went to bed at night. There was very little crime. There was some crime, but it tended not to be violent, and it was not nearly what it is. I mean, the crime today is at least 100 times what it was when I was a boy, maybe way, way beyond that. But one of the key drivers of the crime wave in America is deinstitutionalization, taking those people whom with absolute certainty will go out and they will rape, they will murder, they will mug, they will push people onto the railroad track. You know that almost to a mathematical certainty, and yet you release them because you feel like everybody deserves to be free. Well, I'm sorry, not everybody deserves to be free, because when you release people who are so hideously dangerous as Mr. Neely was, who just go up to 67-year-old ladies who are not even talking to him, and he just decides, hey, just for the fun of it, I'm gonna bash her in the face with all my might. I'm gonna break bones in her face. I'm gonna leave her a bloody mess. It's just gonna be dandy. I'm gonna have fun doing it. I hate to seem callous, but when I see bad things happening to vicious criminals, I don't tend to think of it as, well, this is a great tragedy. Michael Brown, who was the, hands up, don't shoot. Real story, he had just within 30 minutes conducted a strong arm robbery, was shoving a little guy around. Then he's walking down the middle of the street, blocking traffic. And a police officer says, sir, you're going to have to move off the road. And he comes running back. And this is a huge man, Michael Brown. And he lunges in the window of the officer's car, tries to grab his gun to kill the officer. And fortunately, the officer himself was a pretty big guy. And he was able to block him even though he got banged up a little bit in the process, he kept Michael Brown from getting the pistol away. And then Michael Brown starts stalking away. The officer has the presence of mind to open the door, level his pistol, and try to apprehend Brown. And Brown comes storming back towards him, a huge man. And at that point, the officer shoots and kills him. That was described as a tragedy. To me, that was a moment of victory for innocent, decent people whose lives are constantly in danger from a guy like Michael Brown, who is a violent, vicious criminal who adds nothing of substance to society. So anyway, it's we'll see what happens. There is a grand jury that has convened. There is, I believe, there is a Soros prosecutor who is in charge of it. And from what we know of Soros prosecutors around the country, they have a tendency to go light on the criminals and be heavy-handed on innocent citizens. So we will see what happens, but certainly, for many of us, our prayers are with the young Marine sergeant who had the courage and the willingness to sacrifice his life if necessary to defend other people. Somebody yelled out, he's got a knife. It's not clear whether Neely actually had a knife, but there certainly were people on the train who thought that he did. And really, it's intent that matters. Is what's going on in the minds of the people in this situation. So, Elena, you want to have just a final comment before we wrap up here?
Sure. We have, as a society, as you rightly so brought the deinstitutionalization. Kennedy, then some even credit President Reagan, at the time governor of California. And we have increased what they call community care and decreased amount of mental care facilities across United States. It used to be, Google up, guys, check it out. I believe 500,000 patients that we had in these institutions. Now it's down to about 35,000. And the amount of beds that we have available is around 25,000. Again, don't quote me on that, make your own research, but it is under 2,000. It's about 1,900 long-term care beds available. And in this case of Mr. Neely's aunt, she did say that there was no long-term care available. I know Eric Adams, a New York City mayor, has apparently instituted involuntarily confinement, which he was criticized for, which he said that there are certain individuals that may have they may not have any choice but to confine due to danger to themselves and the public. And then he was criticized for that because, certainly civil rights activists and some people felt like this could be used to, target certain individuals. And then people still complained that even when people do get mental health care, they rake up huge bills and sometimes insurance companies don't cover it. And there is some emergency healthcare providers who say that they're not equipped to provide long-term care mental health services. And they usually release these individuals after 48, 72 hours. So if anybody wants to look at this incident and again, do nothing other than criticize the man who believed that he is in imminent danger or protecting others, which again, the investigation will determine all of the particulars of what happened. But if we don't learn anything from the death of Mr. Neely and how our system is not set up to afford needed help to those who are in need, that they are becoming increased danger to the public, and then public takes in their own hands to provide their own safety and security, we're going to have the situations repeated over and over again. And it's not necessary if we as a society look at this tragedy, see, instead of pointing fingers and putting blames, understand that there was a problem. The people in power who have an ability to sort these issues before they become tragedies didn't seem to, or didn't have the tools, or didn't wish to address it. And now we may have another tragedy and another tragedy unless we learn what needs to be done to fix it. Not just point a finger at the member of public who had no other choice to act when he believed that the lives were in danger. And again, investigation will determine all the particulars and whether the, the force should have been used or excessive or non-excessive. It's up to investigation. But the society, instead of ignoring Mr. Neely's problems, he was known. And society, where was outrage before when he was alive?
Right.
Who was there to help him? Who was there to assist him? And now that he's dead, it's somebody else's fault. Well, if anybody used to care about Mr. Neely, time to save Mr. Neely was when he was alive and when he needed help. And we as a society, instead of pointing fingers, need to learn how we fix this from happening again. And if all we learn is to get some political points like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which uses, this to tweet and say, oh, this is injustice, this is so terrible. Where were you, Mrs. Cortez, when there is these homeless people underserved with the mental health issues, with criminal records, are roaming the streets and threatening the general public? Where were you? Why didn't you help them not to get to the point where now their life is in danger as well as public's lives is in danger? And then public is now feels that they're defenseless, that they have to solve it themselves. That's insanity. We can't let this keep happening. And unless we fix it, we will have, unfortunately, this happen over and over again.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We will see what happens. It'll be interesting to see, they say that, a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich if led to do so by the prosecutor. I hope there is someone in a Manhattan grand jury who can display the same type of moral courage that this Marine did and stand up and say, no, I am not going to indict an innocent man, no matter what the mob says, no matter whether there are personal threats made against me, either by politicians or whatever. It is a lot easier to sit in a grand jury room and to vote, no, I will not guilty, I will not persecute an innocent man, than it is for that Marine to take his life into his own hands and put his safety between himself and an insane lunatic who is threatening every helpless person on that train. So thank you very much, Elena. We're always delighted to have you with us. And
thank you for having me. Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much.
Well, this has been Focus on the News. Thank you for joining us today, and we will be back on Wednesday.